All right.
Okay.
It's recording. I mean, it says that it's recording.
We are rolling.
Here we go.
I just quoted Nancy Drew, I think.
Oh, nice.
Remember when she's investigating a murder in LA and she just stumbles onto a film set and Bruce Willis is there? Justice for the Bruce Willis cameo in Nancy Drew that we didn't actually talk about during that episode.
We didn't talk about it?
I don't think we talked about it. We talked about it personally because you were like, that was crazy.
Oh my
that Bruce Willis showed up for 30 seconds in this children's movie. Nancy points out anachronisms and how in his movie, and the director gets all testy, but at one point he's like, and we are rolling.
Nice.
Anyways, okay. We should just start.
All right. Hi, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to Tell Me I'm Sorry, a podcast where we deconstruct and muse on depictions of girlhood in film, literature, and other media.
A feminist celebration of pop culture, the audacity of youth, and the ways we grow away from and into our bodies, beliefs, and dreams for ourselves and each other.
And today we are discussing
Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
It's a big one.
Yeah, it really is.
Portrait of a Lady on Fire, directed by Céline Sciamma, who has directed a lot of films, Water Lilies, Tomboy, Girlhood, which I have seen, and her most recent film is called Petite Maman. She also wrote this film, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It had its premiere at Cannes Film Festival on May 19th, 2019, where it won the Best Screenplay Award. Woo woo. And it was released in the US December 6th, 2019. That was a limited release, and then it went wide February 14th, 2020. So you could go see it on Valentine's Day, just a few weeks before the world shut down due to the COVID pandemic.
What a time.
I know. What a time. Sorry, I don't know. I just immediately took us to, remember this period that is still happening that was full of death and despair and conspiracy theories and darkness?
That takes me straight into my origin story, though, with this film. Not that we're going there yet, but that's what I was thinking about.
It's relevant to mine as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Maggie, I have a question for you. Do you think there is a poster tagline this week for this film?
Oh, I mean, if you have poster, you would have a tagline. There must be film posters for it.
Well, yes, but not every poster has a tagline.
I mean, I guess I'll just say no.
You are correct.
Okay, thank God, dude. Because I knew
not meant to be a high stakes thing. I'm sorry. I feel like I stressed you out.
It stressed me out so much. I was like, I don't know. Well, part of it too, I was like, I hope there isn't.
Right.
Because there's no way it would be good.
Exactly. And my sort of joke to lean into cultural stereotypes, if I may, is that, of course, there's not a tagline because this film is French. And I feel like the French are better than that.
That's fair.
They would be like, no, we will not desecrate our film with a tagline. Of course, maybe there's French sex comedy films that I've never seen that have taglines. But It did not surprise me that this film, which is very artful, didn't have a tagline. However, we do have a logline that I would love you to read for us.
Okay.
So we can assess.
On an isolated island in Brittany, at the end of the 18th century, a female painter is obliged to paint a wedding portrait of a young woman. I think I'm okay with it.
I like it.
Yeah. I like that it doesn't try to give us too much information. It's the main plot point. That's all you need.
Yeah. Because even though it doesn't delve into the romance side of the movie, it's still foregrounding the relationship between the two women, which is what's most important. And the romance is foregrounded by this different type of relationship between the artist and her subject.
Mm-hmm.
Good job, whoever came up with that.
Nice job.
You have our seal of approval because we're the most important international body on judging log lines. Okay. Here is a brief synopsis for you all of what goes down in the Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which a lot happens. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. It's a full film.
You're not wrong.
Thanks. Okay. We are in the 1700s. A French painter named Marin, who is played by Noémie Merlan, is teaching a class when she notices that a student has removed some of her own paintings from storage, including a portrait of a woman on fire. And Marin is very distressed and stirred by seeing this painting suddenly. And then the film goes backwards in time, and we see Marin arrive by boat to this very remote estate where she has been summoned by a wealthy family to paint a wedding portrait for their daughter. After she arrives, Marin learns that she is not the first artist to attempt to paint this portrait, that the previous artist left with the work uncompleted because the daughter, who's named Heloise, played by Adèle Haenel, refused to sit for the portrait. Heloise's sister has recently died, and her parents have removed her from her life at the convent and betrothed her to a nobleman in Milan, who Heloise hasn't even met and therefore does not want to marry. Heloise's mother tells Marin this background and says that Heloise doesn't know Marin is an artist and instead thinks she is a companion for walks, and Marin is instructed to spend her days with Heloise and then construct the portrait in secret from memory. Marin and Heloise do indeed become companions, and as Marin's time with Heloise nears to an end, she confesses to Heloise that she is in fact an artist who has been commissioned to paint the wedding portrait, and Heloise, instead of being angry, asks to see the painting and expresses dissatisfaction with it because she doesn't think it captures her true nature, nor does she think the painting reflects Marin's passion as an artist. And Marin is very affected by Heloise's response and destroys the painting. And Heloise's mother is about to fire Marin when Heloise says that she will sit for the portrait, thus giving Heloise and Marin more time to spend together. And Heloise's mother is going out of the house for 5 days and expects the portrait to be completed when she returns. And during this time, Heloise and Marin's bond deepens now that they aren't surveilled by Heloise's mother. They also spend a lot of time with the housemaid Sophie, and there's a subplot involving Sophie's attempts to obtain an abortion. The three women attend a gathering of other women who live on the island, and the movie at that point really becomes about the bonds that are able to form between women when outside forces don't impede those bonds from existing. And at the center of that is the romantic relationship, which forms between Heloise and Marin, a relationship that feels like it ends as soon as it begins because eventually Heloise's mother returns and Marin must depart, leaving behind the completed portrait of Heloise, which is now to Heloise's liking, partly because it now represents the love she shares with Marin. And the two women part, and the movie flashes to the future, where we see Marin selling her own art at an auction of some sort. And while she's there, she sees a different portrait of Heloise with Heloise's daughter. And then even later, Marin sees Heloise at the symphony. And the film ends with an extended shot of Heloise's face as she listens to Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which Marin played for her one time on the piano. And she grows emotional at the music and presumably the memories it conjures. And we are all very, very sad.
Mm-hmm. It's a very complex sadness, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is one of the ways in which this film is quite remarkable, is that sadness is definitely complicated by our joy that they were able to experience that love.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the sorrow of its temporariness.
Right.
Necessary temporariness due to the confines of patriarchy and et cetera, et cetera.
And there's something joyful even about seeing how deep their feelings remain after all this time has passed. Which, the fact that those feelings remain and they're just feelings and not able to be action anymore is in and of itself sad. But the fact that there's still at least feeling left, like there's something joyful in that. Because to feel deeply, no matter what you are feeling, is such a profound experience.
Mm-hmm.
To feel nothing no more would be sadder, perhaps.
I think so. That final scene, the fact that they let the entire movement, just watching her re-entering the space of their love through that song, I have nothing else to say about it. It's profound in and of itself.
Yes. What is your origin story for Portrait of a Lady on Fire?
I mean, honestly, my origin story isn't that interesting. I watched it during COVID, like probably a lot of people. At the time, TJ and I were displaced. We were living in my sister's basement because when COVID hit, we were living in New Zealand. We had to come home. We didn't have to come home, but we didn't know what was going to happen. If I wasn't going to be able to work because I had a work visa, our money was going to run out eventually. So anyway, we come back to the States. We don't have a place to live. So we ended up living in my sister's basement for a few months. One of our friends back in South Dakota had mentioned that we should watch this film. So we watched it. And what I remember most about it is that this is going to sound dramatic, but also not at all, because if there's anything I believe in, it's art with a capital A. And in many ways, that film just let me enter through a portal. And I feel like there are a lot of portals in this movie in general. Gave me permission not to escape the world, but to experience it most fully via an artistic eye and a very, very open heart. And it honestly also just sort of gave me permission to feel when I was trying to really numb myself from all of the fear and the uncertainty of everything that was happening and all of the death we were seeing. When the world feels really bleak, it's easy to lose faith in the things that you believe in. And for me, that's art. This film was like, I'm a believer.
I love that. I'm so glad that it provided you that. I actually managed to see this film in theaters. I believe it was the last film I saw in theaters before COVID shut everything down. I saw it at a cinema in London because I was studying abroad at the time. Like you, I was somewhere else and then had to come home back to the US very suddenly. And I saw it by myself at the Riverside Studios in Hammersmith, London, right on the river. Very nice place. I was so excited to see it. I'd heard all of these raves about it. Everybody, it seemed, who had seen it was like, this is one of the great movies just ever already. People were confident in that assessment. And I think that initial viewing, I had hyped it up so much in my head that it was never going to be able to meet the expectations I had preemptively constructed for it. And so I'm watching it and I'm engaged and it's beautiful. The way that this film is shot, literally every frame looks like a painting. There's a very specific camera that the cinematographer used. And a lot of these shots are lit with candles and you literally look like you're watching oil paintings. And it's so gorgeous. And I'm seeing all of this texture and this craftsmanship and everything. And I just didn't end up feeling as emotionally involved as I wanted to. And I think it was me being a victim of my own brain. Like, I think the expectations just screwed me over or something. I went into this movie thinking I was going to be sobbing, and then that didn't happen, even though it was really good and I still really liked it. There was just some sort of emotional distance there at that time. Fast forward a few months, I'm living in my childhood bedroom in my parents' house, quarantining, and this movie gets added to Hulu, and I'm like, I should watch that again. And I watched it again. Like a lot of people, I was just watching a shit ton of movies. I was burning through 3 or 4 movies a day. And I don't think I enjoyed any of them because I was so mentally unwell. It was just this thing to pass the time, to make another day end, in hopes that one day this series of days we're having won't be like this anymore. So I didn't really get anything out of the second viewing of Portrait of a Lady on Fire either. I go however many years, I don't watch it. And then Maggie says, we're going to watch it for this podcast. And I knew eventually one day we would watch it for this podcast because I know that you really love it and it just aligns with this project that we have created for ourselves. And so watching it again for the 3rd time in preparation for this episode, it hit exactly the way I had wanted it to hit the very first time I watched it. So I don't know what needed to happen, if it was just, I just needed time. But this time I could literally tell that I was on the precipice of physical and emotional pain, where it's like, I'm not quite sad yet, but in 45 minutes, I know I'm going to be super duper emotional. I have a very specific list of movies where I know that if I want to watch it, I have to watch it at the end of the day so I can go to bed immediately afterwards. Because if I try to watch it too early in the day, I'm just going to like feel bad the rest of the day and not functional. And now I would say this movie is on that list because I made the mistake of watching it at 10 a.m.
Oh, no.
It was Saturday. I made myself breakfast and I'm like, I'm going to watch this movie. Winter is coming. It's cold. And I watched it and I was just fucking sad the rest of the day and was like, I don't know what to do with myself. It's a years-long journey of me finally locking in to Portrait of a Lady on Fire in the way that I always knew I could, but I just couldn't quite get there. Maybe I'm being laborious with this story, but it's what happened.
If I really thought about it, there are some movies, at least one, that I've had similar experiences with, for sure. But, oh man, this one hit me. TJ and I watched it together. And so when it was done, we just looked at each other and we both had tears streaming down our faces. The first time I watched it, though, it's just so, you just feel it in like your bones. And I remember feeling like, am I going to throw up? Not in a okay, when I love something a lot, I want to puke because I'm so happy. I don't actually puke. But anyway, that's how I know it's like peak art. Is if I'm like, am I going to vomit? That means I really love something.
I just don't know what to say.
This is something TJ and I have in common. Because when he was a little kid, he would get so excited at Christmas that he would puke.
Okay. I mean, I have experiences where I get so invigorated watching something that I get tingly, which is maybe kind of akin to butterflies. But yeah, never.
Have you ever seen me when I laugh really, really hard and I'm like doubled over?
Uh-huh.
Sometimes people ask me if I'm okay. They think something's actually wrong.
Okay.
And that's what I call inconsolable joy. Inconsolable with whatever emotion it is I'm feeling. And sometimes I do puke in my mouth a little bit. That's only with joy, though.
Okay.
I just feel like I might puke when it's like this complicated sadness. Anyway, it's a compliment. If I see your art and I'm like, I'm going to throw up, it means I've never seen anything like it. It's the best of the best.
This is fascinating. I genuinely don't have an adequate response, I don't think. So I'm just going to let it.
That's fine. Just let it go.
Let it
That's
be.
fine. Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
Well, that's such a great lead in, you know? I think we're just going to have to put some transition
What's
music
the
in.
scene in this movie that makes you want to blow chunks the most?
God.
Actually, maybe that is a good place to start.
That could be. The first time. Okay, wait, I should say this film is viscerally sensual that when I went back to rewatch it, I was surprised there weren't any blatant sex scenes.
I know.
Because in my mind, I kept waiting for them and they don't happen. The film doesn't need them. The visceral nature of the film just lingers with you in this way that it creates its own kind of sensory landscape and memory field for you to traverse back through, and it becomes your own individual experience with it, which is what any good art does. And so anyway, for me, it is that scene when Heloise and Marianne, is it nighttime? Okay, so this is in my mind, it's nighttime and the firelight is what's giving them like the light, but this could be wrong. It could be the middle of the day. I don't know. And the way that they're touching each other's necks.
Is this when they're lying on the bed?
They're standing up.
Oh, they're standing up. Okay.
Marianne reaches around and has her hand on Heloise's collarbone.
I know what you're talking about.
And like their faces are in profile. The emotion of it that I remember more than even like the visual, because I have such a strong response to it. My memory fails me visually. It's such an individualized experience, I feel like. It's so intimate. That's the word I'm looking for.
Right.
There's such an intimacy
Mm-hmm.
with these characters as you're watching. So yes, that is the scene. That really makes me, I was like, ah, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to throw up. Because and in that case, it was like inconsolable joy. I'm in the presence of the divine, capital ART. And yeah. That's what does it for me.
I'm just envisioning any of the French people involved in this movie listening to these two Americans be like, this movie's so good, it makes me want to vomit. Again, I'm stereotyping French people. I'm sorry, but...
Well, I think that they are better than us.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Okay. I obviously have some things in my notes. I have some questions for you.
Okay.
But I don't know if you wanted to start somewhere in particular.
No, I feel like you're better at getting us on track. You should go first.
Okay. I'll start with this question, which I've asked this question before, I'm pretty sure. And I'm sure I will ask it again in the future because it's a relevant question, which is, in what ways do you view this movie as being about girlhood? I don't think it's a movie that would naturally come top of mind just because the two main protagonists to me are very much women. But that doesn't mean it's not about girlhood or it's not intersecting with girlhood. So I was wondering if you could start there since you picked the movie.
I thought about this at least tangentially as I was watching it. Our protagonists here are very much women. I would agree with that. But I mean, there's a timelessness to the surreality of the environment that they're in. They're in this very isolated place. It kind of moves the narrative beyond time as we would understand it in the real world. But I think too, for me, the older I get, not that I'm super old, but 36 is starting to feel old. The less it takes for me to find and see the youth in someone and their experiences, even my own. So not only are the people younger than me seeming younger than previously, but even my experiences feel younger. And I'm recognizing with each passing year how inexplicably tied I am at the age of 36 to everything that happened to me when I was 16 years old, to everything that happened to me when I was 12 years old. I can tell you about the first time I got my period, or all of the sexist things that were being told to me when I was like 8 or 9 or 10 by teachers or just doctors. Any story about women experiencing life is about girlhood, if they were socialized as a girl growing up, because of how much it shapes you. It never leaves. Heloise specifically is still very much at the mercy of what her mother wants her to do in terms of who she has to marry, which is pretty huge, but also just having to sit for the portrait, be a good girl, sit for this portrait, and her being in defiance of that. That feels very youthful because it is. And I know for me, even at 36, when I'm around my mom, I have a tendency to be defiant in the ways that girls are often defiant. So I think in the relationship between Heloise and her mother, that's very apparent to me.
That was the main thing I was thinking of too, because I don't think it's super buzzwordy to say that Heloise's mom infantilizes her. I think it's true. She's doing this thing where she's infantilizing her daughter by controlling every aspect of her life. And so she's very much treating her like a child because she's not allowing her daughter to make any decisions for herself. But those life changes she's forcing upon her daughter are at the same time very, very adult, because they involve things like marriage and moving to another country and presumably having children. And it's not an exaggeration to say that Heloise is literally liberated the second her mother leaves the house. Those 5 days when her mom is gone are when she truly begins to blossom into this version of herself that she has always wanted to be, and to have this relationship with this other woman that is about respect and intellectual vigor and sensuality and intimacy. And also this relationship with the maid, Sophie. The class divide collapses between the three of them in a lot of ways, and that it's the three of them spending time together in the kitchen where Sophie would usually be working alone. It's the three of them preparing meals together or whatever. All that kind of stuff wouldn't happen.
And then also, I do have empathy for Heloise's mother, because part of this micromanaging of her daughter's life is coming from the fear that she is going to physically lose her daughter like she did her other daughter. The irony being, her other daughter killed herself because we come to understand, or we at least assume, she didn't want to be married off. And so now her mother is particularly, vigilant about watching her every move. She doesn't want to lose her. At the same time, she wants to betroth her, which is a kind of losing her, but in a way that she has control over. I don't think that it gets a lot of attention, but it's always lingering in the background.
I had forgotten how present the mother character is in the first half of the movie. She and Marianne are very, not close, but she has very revealing conversations with Marianne where she's like, yeah, I'll tell you about my daughter who died and my other daughter who isn't listening to me and doesn't want to marry this guy. And here's why I think it's a good thing. Because in the mother's mind, Marianne exists to be on her side, not to help Heloise liberate herself in any way, whether that's physically or emotionally. I had forgotten how present she was in the first half of the movie. Because then when she disappears, a certain oppressiveness just evaporates. So suddenly that even though you are thinking about, okay, their days are numbered, the mom's going to come back, she's going to get married off to this nobleman in Italy, I just forget about the mom, though, for a brief period of time. Just like they did, maybe.
I'm glad you brought up the relationship between the mother and Marianne, because I do assume that Marianne and Heloise are about the same age. And so the fact that the mother is confiding in Marianne in a way that I don't think she would be as candid in conversation with her own daughter, I think that further infantilizes Heloise. Marianne's already in this position where she has control over Heloise's identity, quite literally, via this portrait that she's going to be painting. She is creating Heloise's likeness. For the mother to confide in Marianne about Heloise is another way in which Heloise's autonomy is being stripped from her by her mother, and in turn by Marianne. When we're talking about class, Heloise would be on top, right? And then Marianne. But in terms of this social relationship, the dynamic with her mother, Marianne still has more control over Heloise's story.
Which is where the movie, I think, makes its most interesting turn. Because something I really love about this movie in terms of its plotting is that in a lesser romance, the prime source of conflict between the two lovers would be the secret about the portrait. In that we would go 80% of the movie where Marianne is painting Heloise in secret. And then the final sort of outburst between them after they've already become a couple would be that Heloise discovers that she has been painted in secret this whole time. And that would be the primary source of tension between them and would be what would threaten to break their relationship apart. But here, the movie sets it up so you think that's kind of the main source of tension of, oh, she's going to be painting this woman in secret. And that sense of betrayal is going to be further compounded by the fact that she's also falling in love with her. But then like halfway through the movie, maybe not even halfway, maybe it's even before that, Marianne is like, I need to tell Heloise why I'm actually here. And so she does. And Heloise wants to see the painting and is immediately like, I don't like it. I can tell it's distant from you. And is like, I want to try again. I will sit for you if you can produce a work that feels like it's actually close to you and like it accurately represents my likeness. So Marianne's willingness to tell the truth, and then Heloise's willingness to confront that truth and communicate together about it in search of a solution is what forms the bedrock of the romantic relationship. And that's just way healthier.
Right.
If you think about it. And it's subversive, I would say. And I think because it's just subversive, it immediately becomes more compelling.
And there's some complexity too with Heloise's decision to actually sit for Marianne. Even though the portrait that she is sitting for is ultimately going to be used to marry her off against her will, that decision is a decision. So in that choice, some degree of autonomy is being returned to Heloise, at least as much as Marianne was able to give to her. Women in the 1700s, man.
And then they have that conversation later as Marianne is finishing up the second version of the portrait that is eventually going to be sent to the suitor. And Marianne says something to the effect of, she struggles to look at it because it just reminds her that you will be leaving me. And Heloise is really upset by that response because she's like, this painting, even though it represents you giving me to another or whatever, it's still more reflective of the relationship between you and I. She's able to hold those two competing truths at once of, yes, this represents something related to my lack of autonomy, but also at the same time, I don't want that to overshadow this other meaning it has accumulated, which I want to be the primary meaning of it. And I think in many ways, it's just a movie about not just women having feelings. Obviously, all people have feelings, but it's women talking about their feelings and being direct about them with each other. And I feel like so much media often relies on misunderstanding as a source of tension and plotting. And this movie just forgoes that entirely. I'm just now realizing this. It's a movie about the dramatic and emotional upheaval that can happen when people are direct in their emotions to each other.
I like the point that you've made, because then the movie is never about, which I get I'm irritated. I'm preemptively irritated just thinking about movies that I'm not watching where, yeah, the main point of tension is just one person refusing to say their emotion out loud to the other person. It's like, just tell him, just tell her, like, or fucking don't. I don't really care. Go to therapy or don't. I want real tension, which comes from actual conversation, not just one person withholding information from the other. That's not interesting.
It makes me think of this quote I have from Sciamma. And this is her talking about the Orpheus and Eurydice element. So, backtrack quick. In the film, the three main characters, Heloise, Marianne, and then Sophie, the maid character, they have all these meals together. They form this very wonderful bond as the three of them. And they have this conversation about the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And they all have a different take, to use a very 21st century word, on what they think the myth is saying. And they disagree and they debate each other. And it's this very lively conversation they have. And I pulled this quote from an interview Sciamma gave with Vox, which I'll link it in the show notes for people to read it. She says of this Orpheus and Eurydice myth, a myth that has been looked at by feminists a lot because it's basically about how the male gaze can kill you. Trying to see the point of Eurydice was, for me, a way to play with this myth. I wanted these women to have strong intellectual conversations and perspectives. Myth is not about lessons. It's not about the morality of it. It's about the tension. And I really wanted to embody that, the tension and the question. And so I bring up this quote now because we're talking about, one, this emphasis on conversation and conversing about your feelings as this primary way for the characters to grow and get to know each other. And two, she also mentions tension, which is a word that we have brought up recently. And so I think it just feels so intentional that she wants to create a love story that circumvents the conventional bullshit of miscommunication is the bedrock for the drama. And that I want these women to talk about real things that interest them, ranging from this ancient myth that everyone has a different interpretation of, to my romantic feelings for you in this tragic yet beautiful, ephemeral, week-long love affair.
The idea of myth making and having these characters respond with their own opinions also reaffirms this idea that myths are written by someone. It's just, a story that's put into the canon. And so this commentary on myth making also like places, or at least reminds the audience that this film is now a part of not necessarily a myth making canon, but that it could be if it wanted to. I don't know.
I was actually thinking about this a lot just the other day. I didn't write any of it down. But I was thinking about this element of myth. And I've always thought of myths definitionally, that's not a word, as their most basic definition, a myth is a sacred story. And how this movie is so embroiled in memory. It's a frame story. We start with a frame narrative. We're seeing the action of the love story filtered through the memory of the love story via Marianne, right? And maybe I'm specifically thinking this way because I'm a person who loves to write. I've written a lot about my own life, my own past. This tendency to narrativize your past, I think, is a very human impulse, even if you're not necessarily writing it down and shaping it into an essay or a short story or a poem. But even if you're just replaying the memory of something in your head, you're shaping it into a type of narrative in terms of how you think about that memory, what details you fixate on in that memory, what you take away from the memory. And I think the more time you sit with that narrative, the narrative itself is what feels more real, which is something that this movie also gets at, which is something Heloise directly says to Marianne at one point about a sketch of her where she's like, one day you'll look at her and think of me. You'll look at the sketch and you'll think of me because this sketch will be more real to you than I am. And it's so heartbreaking. And I think the longer we sit with these memories, these narratives, whatever you want to call them, and they become more and more real to us, that is what becomes sacred to you, becoming more fixed, you know? And I think that is the most powerful, perhaps, type of self-mythologization that we do, is the way that we hang on to the stories we have crafted about ourselves of things we once lived. So I see this movie operating in that space because it's acknowledging that that happens. And I think by the end, it's not out of pocket to say that some sort of myth has been created about the relationship between these two women. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because to bring back to where I started, if a myth is just a sacred story, then what could be more beautiful than holding on to the sacred story that exists between you and a past lover? That's what I was thinking about that while I was at the grocery store or some shit the other day.
Nice.
And I didn't have time to write it down, so I don't know if that made sense.
No, it did. And I don't disagree. But I think my hesitance to refer to this story as a myth is because of how deeply true it feels. And if we are working off the definition of a myth is a sacred story, then yes, absolutely. But if we are placing the idea of myth in this collective consciousness of a myth is something made up, then I almost feel like calling it a myth does it an injustice, depending on the definition of myth we are utilizing for the sake of argument. And I 100% agree with yours.
I think you have raised a fair point. And I guess, okay, now I'm thinking about the Orpheus and Eurydice thing, because the point that one of them raises is that the story is always told from Orpheus's perspective. So we know that he went to the underworld to rescue Eurydice, was told, okay, fine, but she has to walk behind you and you can't look at her until you've escaped the underworld. Or if you turn around and look at her, she'll die. And he turns around and looks at her and she dies. And that's where Sciamma is getting this idea of, it's literally about how the look of a man can kill you. But then one of the characters, and I don't remember which character it is, raises the idea of, what if Eurydice told him to turn around? And this idea of just deciding, maybe she had a voice that hasn't been recorded ever. Who's to say that's not true? And so they have this conversation about it. And what that's making me think about is I can interpret this narrative before me, meaning the story of Heloise and Marianne, as a myth of some kind and glean whatever significance I want from it. And even if my meaning drifts further from, now I'm talking about them like they're real fucking people, even though they're not. But like, there were women in 1700s France who had secret lesbian love affairs. So in that way, they are real. The meaning that I might glean from it, even if that is far from the actual truth also exists at the same time. Mm-hmm. I guess that's why I'm okay saying that it evolves into myth. I'm being so weird about this.
No, and it does, though, evolve into myth quite literally in the film's own language, because the conversation they have after one of them, poses this notion that, oh, maybe it was Eurydice that tells him to turn around. And the logic there being, because then their love could just remain intact. That was their story. Eurydice, for all of eternity now, knew that this person loved her so much and so fully that they were willing to do anything to get them back. And that will be their story now forever, because Eurydice told him to look back. It also obviously gives the autonomy back to her. And then in the final scene before Marianne leaves, Heloise is in her wedding dress and says to Marianne, as Marianne's walking out the door, "Regarde," she says, "look." And Marianne looks back. Yeah, it is evolved into myth, and that myth is made real then. And I think maybe then my question is it still myth, or is it now truth? Has the myth evolved into truth? Or has the truth evolved into myth? Right? I don't know. I think that I'm not sure that it matters. I think both things are true and both things have to be true in order for either one to matter as deeply as they do. Have we gone too far down the rabbit hole?
I think so. I'm just now thinking about that scene when they have to have this very stilted goodbye in front of in front of Heloise's mom, and it's so devastating and infuriating. And then Marianne is rushing down the stairs just to, like, you can tell she's speeding away, she's fleeing, because this is just an emotionally upsetting time. And then Heloise from the top of the stairs tells her to turn around, and she turns, and that's like all and it cuts away really fast. There's like this briefest catharsis.
My mind is thinking of two other things. One, another puke point for me.
Okay.
When Marianne is saying goodbye to Heloise, and so she hugs her, she places her head on the other side from where Heloise's mother is standing,
mm-hmm.
and she breathes her in. Oh my God. And it's such like a deep breath, and she does it so quickly. It's making me want to cry just thinking about it right now. It's incredibly fucking moving. Oh my fucking God. I'm going to puke right now. I'll puke all over this microphone.
That's a bad.
I won't.
That's a bad investment.
I am way too poor to be puking on this shit. And the other thing sort of like opens our conversation away from the myth, truth, argument, or not really argument, but rabbit hole.
Pondering.
Yes, pondering. Is that is not the first time that Heloise tells Marianne to look. I think it's the third. There are several times. And what I love about that is Marianne is the painter. Marianne is the one who is supposed to know where and when to look. But Heloise is directing her sight, even though Heloise is technically the subject of the portrait throughout the film, right? She's subjected to this arranged marriage. She's the subject of this portrait. It's just another of those small ways that we get to see Heloise subverting the narrative that's already been written for her life by her mother. She's taken herself from the subject to the one that's looking. And now she's in this sort of position of authority.
I like that you bring up this idea of subversion and authority, because I feel like that happens in the very first scene between Heloise and Marianne. Heloise has been told that Marianne is her companion for walks. And so it's like, okay, Heloise is ready for her first walk. And they just sort of meet up in silence and walk outside. And Heloise immediately begins running towards the cliff. And because of what Marianne knows about Heloise's sister, which is that she killed herself by jumping off the cliff, and because she has been told that because Marianne has been told that Heloise is not happy with her current situation, when Heloise starts running, you can tell Marianne thinks she's about to also jump off the cliff and kill herself. And you see this panic in her face. And Heloise eventually, she stops right on the edge of the cliff and she says, "I dreamed about doing that." And Marianne says, "Jumping?" And she says, "No, running." In that moment, Marianne thought she was trying to do one thing, and then she proved, no, I'm actually doing this other thing. I just really wanted to run. And I think that's a very powerful statement of, no, my life is not going the way I want it to go right now. And I don't know what I'm going to do about that. But in this moment right here, I'm going to take the choice I do have to run, and I'm going to run. There's this very evident push and pull of who holds power over each other. And so then to later see them acknowledge these power dynamics that are at play and equalize them through conversation, it's just very beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, it's in that very first scene where Marianne maybe recognizes all of the privileges she does have, even if Heloise is of a higher class financially. Marianne is able to travel the world. She has her own career, right? And this idea of like power and freedom. Well, do you have intertextualities? Specific ones that you want to talk about?
I do. I already mentioned the Sciamma quote from that interview. I'm looking at my notes. I have a whole thing about the word companion and the idea of companionship, which can be brought up at any time. So if you have an intertextuality that you want to bring up now while it's on your mind, that totally works.
Why don't you start with companionship? Because I feel like whatever you say will sort of lead me into mine.
Okay.
Maybe it, who knows? No, but I think that's a good place to start. I like that.
Okay. So I've mentioned this line a few times before already. When Marianne initially arrives and Heloise doesn't know she is a painter, there to paint her wedding portrait. Marianne is told that Heloise thinks you're a companion for walks. As the movie went on, the more and more that line stuck out with me. And I think the reason I'm hinging on it so much is that the romance in this movie is so moving, not because it totally defies the category of companionship, not because it transcends companionship, but because it is founded on companionship. And not just that it's founded on that and then transmutes into something else, but companionship is just integral to the relationship's entirety. If you juxtapose the relationship between Heloise and Marianne with the impending marriage between Heloise and this random man who we literally know nothing about other than he's rich and lives in Milan. It's a marriage she has not chosen. It's not something we think she would ever choose for herself, but it's been forced upon her. And that relationship, if you could even call it a relationship at that point, because she literally hasn't met him, is the antithesis of companionship. Because in the historical context with which we're working, the point of being a man's wife was like not to be his companion, nor is the husband expected to be his wife's companion. But because it's a relationship between two women, it's expected, oh yes, they'll be companions. When you're just thinking about intimacy, even if there were women back then who weren't sexually attracted to other women, they were still presumably having more emotional intimacy with other women who were allowed to be their companions in just everyday life, as opposed to the husbands they were expected to have sex with and then provide an heir. And so because it's two women, it gets to be both. It gets to be companionship and the emotional intimacy that comes with that, and the romantic sexual attraction and intimacy that comes with that. And I just think, I don't know if even our conception of romance in 2024, or I guess we're 2025 now, is fully aware of the necessity of companionship. I just think that is what makes it so moving in this movie, is that the thing it was pretending to be, you're pretending to be her companion for a walk, ended up actually also being true. Because she was actually one just being a companion for walks. But then that ended up subsuming being the secret portrait artist and everything. That's my thing on companionship.
I am thinking that I agree. I don't think like our modern notions of love, at least are, no, I'm going to rephrase, are patriarchal, heteronormative notions of companion, of what a companion is, don't understand that the deep layered level, I don't know, I guess just the layers of companionship that you just talked about, and how there aren't these hard and fast lines between platonic and romantic and sexual love. Oftentimes it's quite blurry. And I think most love that is healthy love blurs all of those lines. And I am not just talking about romantic love. When I say that, I'm talking about friendship. I'm talking about family. Not that we have like romantic feelings for our family members. I don't mean it like that. But familial love is certainly different than platonic love, right? I wouldn't describe my love for my sister as being platonic. That's bizarre. I actually don't really like the word platonic because I think it speaks to a surface level love for someone else. It's within these confines and that's it. It cannot move beyond.
It feels very neutered.
Yeah. I'm just thinking through my thought.
Okay.
To get to the next one.
Okay.
Which is this, which actually is a roundabout way into my intertextuality, at least one of them. So one of my intertextualities was another film that also came out in 2020, directed by Mona Fastvold, I believe. I should have typed that because my written handwriting sometimes is very quick and in cursive and messy. But the film is The World to Come. And it is set in rural New York in 1856. And there are these two women, one played by Catherine Waterston, who I really fucking love. She was in this movie in 2007 called The Babysitters that I think is absolutely phenomenal and that we might do on this podcast. I think her performance anyway, I should say.
She's good. I like her.
So she plays the character Abigail. And then we also have Vanessa Kirby, who apparently was in like a Fast and Furious film or like a Fast and Furious like reboot sort of film.
I think she might have been in... No, that was Brie Larson. No, okay. Vanessa Kirby was in the one I have not seen, which is the spinoff with The Rock and Jason Statham.
Okay.
Which I have Hobbs and Shaw. Haven't watched that one. She's in that one.
Okay. That's what...
It's like outside of the main franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by reboot. I don't know anything about Fast and Furious. I was like, reboot, whatever the fuck. So spinoff. Okay, yeah. And she plays this character, Tally. Anyway, they're both married, living in these cabins. They have this very hard rural life in the mountains, taking care of some animals. And, you know, life is very laborious. And their husbands, especially Abigail's, often have to leave to go into town to buy things or travel for whatever. And so Tally starts to come over to Abigail's fairly frequently. Their relationship grows into a sexual one, and they are very much in love with each other. And most of this story is told through Abigail's journals. She records everything that's happening in her life. There's this scene where they're in the woods and they're laying in a blanket. They're just having a conversation about their lot in life, right? As women and as two women in love specifically. And Abigail ends up saying to Tally something along the lines of, but don't you think there might be a cage that would suit us? And so when you were talking about companionship, I was thinking about how women in a lot of ways have been confined to companionship and how that has ultimately led to the demonization of gossip because eventually men realized, oh, when we put women in these spaces and they start having conversations and they start talking to each other about what's really going on and blah, 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 right? And then that makes it dangerous for men because now they have this community where they confide in each other. And sometimes that companionship is to men, right? In terms of marriage, where there's not real reciprocity. But when they are confined to companionship with another woman or with other women, there's strength in that. And so I just really felt like that so perfectly aligned with that conversation that Abigail and Tally had that I took note of and that I've been thinking about a lot. And this, of course, though, had me thinking about the Green World Archetype, which I think about a lot. And I know I've brought up already.
Wait, can I quickly respond?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
No, you're okay.
Yeah.
There was another piece that I wanted to make sure I got out there. And I think it actually dovetails quite nice with what this idea of confined to companionship, because I think, and this is purely me just synthesizing my own experience of living in the world and recalling the ways people around me have talked. I also feel like the word companionship is used maybe less so now, but at one time, definitely more commonly, was used as a euphemism for queerness. For example, Willa Cather. I feel totally fine speaking into this microphone and saying Willa Cather was a lesbian. But some scholars are like, nothing was ever definitive. She did all the letters that might have had information that could confirm that are no longer exist. But she certainly did live with her companion for 30 years because Willa Cather lived with the same woman for decades. I believe her name was Edith. And so I feel like the word companion in certain times, in certain circles, got thrown around a lot as a way to talk about attraction between, say, two women or two women who are in a romantic relationship or anything related to queerness and queer sexuality in a way that like acknowledged its existence but was also dismissive of it at the same time. And so I just want to acknowledge that I'm aware that that complication is there. Well, I'm also talking about how profound I find it that companionship is such a central part of this particular romance between two women. And that some people would be like, well, yeah, they're, companions as a way to be fucking weird about it. But to me, they're companions and lovers and friends and confidants and all of these things. It's one of many things they are.
Yeah, I haven't thought about how that the term companion is often like queer coded.
Mm-hmm.
In kind of like really ridiculous ways.
Right.
Too. And sure, maybe you do just live with someone who's just your friend for 30 fucking years. But if it had been a man, they as in scholars, would have been like, oh, that was her lover.
Right. Or it would have opened up this whole other can of worms where they were like, of course there had to have been a sexual component to it. Where they would over-sexualize it and maybe call her his mistress or something, So I think it is a complicated word. But for the sake of this conversation about this movie, I want to sculpt it into something empowering.
No, and that's a really good point about over-sexualizing the potential relationship had it been with a man instead of a woman, right? So the Green World, very quickly, I just wrote a very brief summary of it because I don't want to get into all of the scholarly background. But basically, the Green World Archetype is a space in literature where the Green World is seen as a space where feminine power can be celebrated without being impeded upon by patriarchal ideologies. We go into nature or some kind of isolated space, and now women can be themselves, right? We see this when Heloise and Marianne meet up with all of the women around the fire. And obviously, this desolate, cliff-laden castle or whatever that they're living in. It's a kind of green world. There are two problems with the Green World Archetype. Well, two primary problems that I feel like if we're going to talk about it, we have to draw attention to them. The first being essentialism, saying that women are essentially the group of people that, benefit from an escape from the capitalist, greedy, violent civilization that we live in. And that isn't true. Many people would benefit, not just women. And also like this romanticization of nature. Like, are women really safe out in the fucking woods or even in like desolate spaces or isolated spaces? No, women face real threats in the wilderness. So essentialism and this romanticization of the natural world, I think, are problems with this idea. But still, I think the Green World Archetype is valid. It creates another world in which women are allowed to love each other in a different way, in a more nuanced way, perhaps in a sexual way, in a way that is truer to themselves. And I think in its traditional understanding, it's usually just like a single woman going out into nature to like find herself. Think like Cheryl Strayed in Wild, right? That I feel like is a very like the quintessential contemporary example of entering the green world.
I was thinking of Anne of Green Gables, which is very old, but like that's a book a lot of people read when they're young and all about being one with the trees and the fields and the mud between her toes.
That's a great example too. I also read that when I was quite young. And the idea of the green world also becomes a problem, especially for two women in love, when that love specifically is of a sexual or romantic nature. Because even though all of these women gather around that fire in this scene, right? I don't know if it's just like all the women of the island. I get the sense that a lot of the other women are of like a lower class than Heloise. There's this midwife character who ends up helping. Oh, what is the servant's name?
Sophie.
Sophie, yeah. Helping Sophie get an abortion, or she performs an abortion procedure on her. So this sort of like witch archetype too, we're getting with these women dancing around the fire, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yes, this is a green world. Women are escaping patriarchal norms, abortions or plans for abortion are being made, or at least the potential for that is there, right? Bodily autonomy. However, Heloise and Marianne, at this point, we know there is something between them, and it cannot happen even in this space, even in this green world that has been made a safe space for women. So I thought I needed to watch another period drama love story, but like a heteronormative one, so that I could sort of compare. Okay. So we have The World to Come, right? And Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Similar vibes. Mm-hmm. And then I watched In Secret, which came out in 2014.
Oscar Isaac is in this movie.
Is he the one that Elizabeth Olsen has like the affair with? Okay.
Oscar Isaac is really hot. That's the only reason. Like universally, everyone's like, that man is hot. Sorry.
The way you said it, I was like, she must be talking about that one guy. She must be talking about that
guy. And I think he's very talented. I have not seen this movie, but I know of it.
Okay. So it's actually based on a novel from 1860, which I thought was interesting. Also made the perfect film because The World to Come is set in 1856, right? So yeah, that guy is in it. Elizabeth Olsen, Jessica Lange.
Jessica Lange.
Yeah, she's great.
She's so...
She's fucking great. And she's fucking great in this too. So basically, Elizabeth Olsen has to marry her cousin,
Draco Malfoy.
Yes.
With a very, very ugly haircut.
It's so bad. It was very distracting. I was very distracted by it. I couldn't stop staring at it because even one of the pieces of hair just kept.
I mean, I feel like that was by design.
I think
yeah. You would be like, yeah, don't fuck that guy. Fuck Oscar Isaac instead.
Right. Which she does many a time. Spoiler alert. But it's based off a novel written in 1860, okay? There is actually another connection between In Secret and Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is that Oscar Isaac's character, he paints Draco Malfoy. And as he's painting him, Elizabeth Olsen's character is in the room, and she is obviously very sexually aroused just in his presence in general and watching him paint. And she doesn't feel any kind of passion for her cousin. And he says to her, not Draco Malfoy, the other guy, he tells her not to move because he's painted her shadow into the painting of this man she's married to. The painting is in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, as with In Secret, is a kind of portal into this green world, right? Him secretly painting her shadow is this way of painting his feelings for her into this portrait. So a lot of stuff happens, right? She starts fucking Oscar Isaacs, And in secret, they end up killing Draco Malfoy. Can't live with the guilt. And then I won't tell you how it ends. But there is a scene where she asks him, Therese is her name. Sorry, Elizabeth Olsen's character.
We've just been calling them by their real names, except Draco Malfoy, who's, I don't even remember what that actor's name is.
I don't either.
Tom? Is his name Tom?
I don't know. We're sorry, Draco. I'm very sorry. I thought that you...
No, but actually, what is his name?
No, I never knew.
I didn't even
I'm
write looking it up.
But I only wrote down Jessica Lange and Elizabeth Olsen. I only wrote down the women. Not even on purpose, but anyway. So, Laurent, that's Oscar Isaac's, the character. Okay. So, Laurent asks her, Elizabeth Olsen's character, Therese. Laurent asks Therese, do I own you completely? And she asks him in return, do I own you? And then they kiss. What's Draco Malfoy's real name?
His name is Tom. Tom Felton.
Okay, Tom Felton. Thank you for that. Sorry, Tom. You deserved more. So Laurent asks Therese, do I own you completely? And then she asks him in return, do I own you? And then they kiss. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, fuck. The Green World, I was like, this is so obvious. It's about ownership. It's about ownership. So it's ultimately a question of ownership. Not only can Abigail and Tally in the world to come and Heloise and Marianne in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, not only can they not own each other, neither do they seek to. However, even in this space where Laurent and Therese, just like Marianne and Heloise, just like Abigail and Tally, they have these secret relationships. Laurent and Therese still seek to own each other in some way, because that is the measure of heteronormative love that the patriarchy has created for us all. I don't think that this is true all of the time, but it certainly exists. It is true in theory, which is that straight love exists in the real world, obviously. Like, straight love is allowed to exist in the real world because it can be owned, because somebody can lay claim to it. The Green World typically is understood as being a space entered by like a solitary girl or woman. But if we enter the Green World with another, what if we enter the Green World with another person who we want to love? Because arguably, anytime you're in a relationship that the world does not want you to be in, you have to go into the Green World to love each other. You have to find that portal, whatever that might be. Some people need a Green World in which they can escape not only patriarchy, but also racism, and all of the confines of white supremacy and classism, et cetera, et cetera. And so if the Green World is a place where love can flourish, where it otherwise cannot, then it just comes down to who gets to own the narrative of that love, even once you enter the Green World. Because when they're all dancing around the fire, Heloise and Marianne can't just go up and kiss each other, because the Green World is owned by patriarchal ideologies of what love can and should be. So queer love has to enter and enter and enter, portal after portal after portal. And that is why we see so many different portals in Portrait of a Lady on Fire. We have the Vivaldi song and the portrait itself and even the wedding dress. And I'm sure, and the myth of Eurydice and Orpheus.
I have so many thoughts, and we're running out of time because I do want to eventually get home to eat dinner.
I'm sorry.
I swore I wasn't even going to bring this up. because I was like, it'll get its own episode. But what you're saying about this notion of ownership and how in these depictions of two women in love that you've talked about in these two different movies, the idea of owning the other is not even a notion. But in this similar time period, similar forbidden circumstance of relationship between a man and a woman, the idea of ownership does come up. This fear that somehow in any romantic relationship between a man and a woman, there's this idea of ownership at play. And I guess what it's making me think about is how in the same interview that I referenced earlier, where Sciamma talks about her interest in myth, she also talks about how one of her primary influences in making this movie was Titanic. Which Maggie has heard me talk about this before. Okay, I adore Titanic for many reasons. I think it's genuinely just one of the great films, period. And what she says about why she's so influenced by Titanic is because she said she felt it was a great love story about emancipation, which is the opposite of ownership, right? But even when you look at that love story, even though it is a heterosexual one, they still have to find their own green world because of this class divide where Rose, who is 17, is betrothed to this much older man who's just horrible. And she's like, actually, I'm interested in the cute artist boy who's age appropriate. And her mom is like, no, he's poor. And so there is still that roadblock there. But it's this idea that that specific relationship at that specific time specifically provided this girl with the notion of emancipation. And that was what Sciamma was particularly drawn to. She talks about other things about Titanic. Again, you should just read this interview.
I wasn't thinking about it in terms of the history of women being like betrothed to men in arranged marriages. I was thinking about it in terms of the green world specifically, and at what point, though, the world recognizes that love. And it's not necessarily the people. I'm not saying it's the people inside of the relationship. I'm saying it's the world that relationship exists in. Mm-hmm. So for like Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio, they do enter a green world, right? When they go and they party with all the other poor people. But their love can be on display in that space. But if Kate Winslet had been in love with a woman in that space, she could not have been. Because of the patriarchy, Kate Winslet was able to experience even more liberation than Marianne and Heloise and Tally and Abigail ever would have been able to, right? Because they only needed to enter one portal. They only needed to enter one space. They didn't then need to find a space where their queerness was safe as well.
Yeah. No, okay, this is all cohering. And I think you're 100% right. Okay, Maggie, what does Portrait of a Lady on Fire make you want to tell your younger self?
I guess that whatever version of divinity you're searching for because you can't believe in the one that your parents have provided to you, aka a Catholic God, it's okay to continue to seek the divine through art. And eventually that art will become the divinity that you've been seeking. And your life will be better for it. That's it.
I'm going to bring it back to my origin story, which was this very distinct version of my younger self seeing this movie for the first time. That was like 6 years ago. 5? Jesus. This is just the fact of what happened. I saw this movie. The world got a lot worse after I saw it. And in some ways, the world has gotten better, and in some ways, the world is bad again. And the world will always have good things and bad things happening. But this movie got better while all those other good things and bad things were happening. Sometimes things get better. Not to sound like a, I don't even know, 2010 anti-bullying PSA, but this movie got better with time. And sometimes time is a real one and is like, I'm going to let this get better for you. And you just got to take those wins when you can. That's what I'm landing on.
Yeah.
Which is also fucking obvious, but
it's easy to forget.
Yeah.
So I think it's always good to have a reminder of that, especially when we're young.
Everyone who's listening, I hope something gets better for you in your life, no matter what that is. Thank you so much for listening. We greatly appreciate it. We would love it if you subscribe to the show on your podcast listening platform of choice. Give us a rating. That is nice. Leave us a review. That's nice. Those are helpful.
Check the show notes for the secondary, like text, podcast, whatever kind of media intertextuality we referenced. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Tell Me I'm Sorry, and email us your musings and questions at tellmeimsorry@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at _Saint_Margaret_, which I haven't been on there for like a month, but I'll be getting back on there every now and again soon.
You can also join our book club. If you are interested, there's information in one of the pinned posts on our Instagram. You can click the link in our bio. I'll also put a link you can copy and paste in the show notes. If you are interested in signing up for that, we meet on Zoom. Is there anything else?
No.
Okay. I'm Marin.
And I'm Maggie.
And you've been listening to Tell Me I'm Sorry. And we have a special announcement for what our next episode is going to be. Because it was a mutual decision together that we were like, this is the journey we want to embark on next. Who's going to say it?
I don't know. Should we say it at the same time?
Okay. When I get to 3. This is so stupid. The Twilight Saga. Yay! We are going to watch all 5 of them. I have not seen all of them, so this is a new thing for me. We're not going to do 5 episodes on these though. We're going to do at least 2 episodes. Bunch some of the movies together cuz Maggie has assured me that they're not worth 5 full episodes doing a 1-to-1 thing. But the next episode, we will definitely be talking about Twilight and New Moon. At least.
Yes, absolutely. I would do 5 separate episodes just on Kristen Stewart.
You could just do
alone.
a podcast on Kristen Stewart's movies.
Yeah.
We love her.
Yeah, we do. Okay.
So that's what we're doing.
We're basically just watching Kristen Stewart.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Join us. Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey. I hope this sounds okay because it's just on my headphones. Why does this feel like an audition tape or something? But this was a fun excuse to like go back through my old notebooks and exposure therapy for cringe. But anyway, I'm Rachel Ann Morris, and this is a poem I wrote when I was 17, and it's called Ephemeral. New York left me burnt out like the cigarette hole in the knee of my jeans, like the contents of the envelope that held most parts of my dog, not the important parts. I moved back to the mountains, back outside, back to a reality of breathless birds and pygmy daisies dotting the backyard, sky and earth. There are so many things for me in Appalachia that don't exist in the spaces between coffee shops and stock-still apartment buildings. There are so many reasons to be. There are so many reasons to be, and most of them are green and open and smell like dirt. The gaps between teeth and fingers and rocks on the riverbed make up this skeleton, this wayward muscle structure. Our bodies pulse with light. Ethereal goddesses are we. In New York, we were white noise. Here we are the loudest, the brightest, the beacons burning through the air, fireflies blazing with the knowledge that something's gotta give, everything's gotta give. We all gotta give to feel. We bite into fresh tomatoes that we stole from the neighbor's farm, sticky with sweat and yellow seeds, stoplights on the corner of 49th. We know it all. We are the rebels of the wind gales and bug-bitten legs. We are so real I can taste it in the water from the Mori. We are so real that we blend into the light. The sun stains us, but we are fast. We are birds. We are light. We are.